Welcome to the No BS Short-Term Rental Podcast, an unfiltered look into the global vacation and short-term rental industry.
I'm Mateo Bradford.
And I'm John Stokinger.
And this is our podcast. We bring the right people to the table at the right time, giving you an inside view and take on the short-term rental industry like no other podcast can.
Morning, Mateo. How are you, man?
I'm fantastic, man. How are you?
We've had some technical difficulties this morning, but that's okay. You're coming to us live with amazing audio and video quality from your car.
Yes.
Exciting.
Yes. I am, and I'm on my hotspot. So how good is that?
Hey, living the tech dream here right now.
If you only knew that I'm sitting in an IHOP parking lot by the San Francisco airport right now, recording a podcast. So it's like strange looks. Like it's because people are going to be like, what the fuck is this dude doing with a microphone? But in all fairness, I am in San Francisco, so I'm pretty sure there's weirder shit going on in the streets.
Yeah, truly. Just look around the corner, you're gonna have some weirder shit. Well, season 2, episode 22, we have an amazing guest. We're gonna dive right into it because we got a lot to talk about. The one and only Andrew Kitchell, CEO and founder, if I hope I'm saying that correctly, of Wheelhouse. Thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate you jumping on today.
Excited to be here. And Mateo, I bet there's another podcaster within 100 yards of you because it is San Francisco. And
there's a dude doing something behind a dumpster over there. It might be a podcast. It might be something.
That sounds like maybe not a
podcast. I don't know. There's antennas. I'm gonna leave.
Yeah, he's holding something in his hand.
Right.
It may be a microphone. It may not.
I'm not looking. So you see me not looking right anymore. I'm just not going to do that. So.
Well, it's early. And you boys jumped on early in the West Coast. So I appreciate you jumping on. And we really want to go ahead and talk about, Wheelhouse, big in the news, exciting stuff happening. And it's been in the works for a while, and behind the scenes, this has been a long time coming to get to where we are today. And, we're going to let you tell your story, but, the big news in the, officially spinned out of Wheelhouse is officially spinned out of Lyric, and you have a 16 million raise. Is that correct?
That is. Yeah. Yeah.
Congrats, by the way.
Yeah. Congrats. Shout out.
Thank you. Shout out to the team. Right. So it was closed in January. You're right. It was 7 months of work to make it all happen. Cause it was when you spin out, that's really a restructuring of an organization. It's not a simple thing necessarily. So there's a lot of kind of moving pieces, but we finished it in January. We announced it last week. Probably be sharing a little more about what it looks like. I can share a little more here too about kind of the composition.
You heard it here first.
Raise.
Yeah, we love that.
Exactly. But it turned out to be a really additive raise for sure.
That's awesome. We're super stoked to hear that. And I definitely want to get into that and talk about current moving forward. But I want to chat and we want to talk about, I look at your resume and you have a very, prestigious, if you're looking as far as, looking at companies in the space and the short-term rental space, Lyric, Beyond Pricing as a co-founder. Now you're doing something different. And before that, you have some interesting things for me that I didn't really know about, some marketing stuff, this 30 words thing. Everyone has like this awesome story, like how they stumbled into the space. How did you become, come into Beyond and then from there, move to Lyric and do the, like, how do you get into the short-term rental space? What was your trajectory? Tell us your story.
Yeah. I mean, it's like kind of a classic story of not necessarily what but who you're lucky to meet along the way. Right. I mean, I showed up to San Francisco and the company you're referring to, 30 Words, was the first company I started, but I started it from San Francisco and I had arrived here kind of by bike. To be honest, I had biked down from the San Juan Islands in Washington. I was a bike and kayak guide.
What?
I biked to town.
I'm sorry. Time out. Nope. Stop right there. So you biked from the San Juan Islands all the way to San Francisco?
I did. I took a bus for the last little bit because the bike I was on was so old and broken. But it was kind of like I came to San Francisco because I'd heard stories about entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up arriving here and meeting and eventually moving in with some folks who were starting, they're building businesses. And at the time, this was 2007 going into 2008. It was when a lot of these like early stage accelerators were starting up. So I had a roommate get into Y Combinator. It was the class that actually had Brian Chesky and Nate and Joe in the class. And I remember, so we had a home there were 5 of us living in this home. There were 4 businesses being started. None of us had any money. And my friend came back from the first or second YC class and he said, there's this really crazy idea called Air Bed and Breakfast. It's never going to work, but the guys who run it are great. Let's help them out. So we threw ultimately one and then multiple couches on Airbnb very early. Because my business 30 Words wasn't making any money, I was renting out my room on Airbnb, and I would have Airbnb guests show up and I would go sleep on the couch down in the living room. It was that awkward, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it paid.
That's
for
amazing.
Paid for rent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of last crazy turn here was through that met a team, Movity, which I eventually joined, kind of an early like true technology company that illustrated the way of both technology and raising venture capital. That's part 1. And part 2 is I hosted Brian Chesky and had him come over to my home and had ABC News show up and film the whole thing. And I was, by that point, it's safe to say, kind of addicted on the category, right? I thought that the space was fascinating. I thought, and I still think is the greatest unlocking of creativity in the history of hospitality. It's like, who are we to be able to, take a few photos, set up a listing and start making money to allow us to live this kind of different, to pay for businesses and to pay for small adventures and stuff like that. It was kind of incredible and like very obviously a big unlock. So I love the story from or love the kind of industry from the perspective of like, it just changed my life.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's incredible. First of all, I don't know that people understand because I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on the fact that you rode your bike from the San Juan Islands. This guy rode his bike essentially from Canada to California. That's huge. That's the entire West Coast.
I had a lot of time to think.
That's well, kudos to you for that, brother. That is a hell of an accomplishment because I love that area. But I also love that your story is kind of a pioneering one within that space. And it seems like that's, kind of your personality and kind of who you are. And it's a large part of your story. And not to minimalize it at all. I think, being able to be a part of that creative cohort, and I never knew that. I never knew that your origin stories go that deep. Talk to us a bit about that grind from there. How did it get from couches to and from your vantage point, because being in proximity, being in San Francisco, being around Airbnb, and shout out to Airbnb, but I don't want to make this about them. I definitely want to keep this to your story, but you have a parallel line. And so you've been able to see this from the front line. How's that been?
It's been up and down every which way, but fascinating. I think I fell in love with entrepreneurship pretty early. Just in the notion that every day is going to look different. And that if you really value what I'm optimizing for at the end of all these things is I want to have had a really fun and interesting life and met great people.
Yeah.
So through that lens, every up and down that we'll probably talk about over the course of today has just been interesting.
Right.
It hasn't always been easy, but at least it's been interesting and been oh damn, that's a crazy story. And I like that. Right. But the break for me most likely, from this kind of hacker house, let's call it, I ended up meeting an individual named Eric Wu, who he now runs a company called Open Door. He's one of the, in my opinion, great CEOs, young CEOs in Silicon Valley or anywhere, super thoughtful individual. And he was friends with a friend, and he picked me up one day for a kind of a one-day project. And he talked to me about what he was building. By the end of the kind of day we spent together, I was like, I would love to join this. And that team was, Movity was using this kind of new notion of open source data to start to inform home purchasing decisions. So we were looking at everything from what are crime levels and starting to map it and starting to visualize crime data. And then looking at transportation times and all these things. And our team, as a team of 6, got acquired by Trulia, but the 1 year journey I had there before, Pinterest started out of the 6-person office. Instagram was a stone's throw away. It was kind of this like glory days of Silicon Valley, and how could you not get addicted
right
to that type of thing, and seeing these people go on to build, go from 2 people to $1 billion company in a matter of time. That was Instagram. It was just so fascinating. So I ended up saying, and kind of learning from Eric, a little bit of the way of venture. Eric actually eventually was the individual who brought me in to run what was then called Beyond Stays and ultimately became Beyond Pricing. But again, going back to kind of, it's not necessarily what you know, it's kind of who you meet and who you can call to get help, or who kind of says, hey, I've got something I'm working on, why don't you come join me? That ultimately led to this kind of now almost decade in the short-term rental space, kind of building from a bunch of different angles. So like the ups and downs of it have been fascinating and fun. Ultimately, I'm kind of driven by a love of the category, and kind of still the notion, and kind of what gets me excited every day is like, it's still a totally misunderstood category by what I'll call Main Street. So to me, that's fascinating.
Right. Can you talk to me about, you talked about Beyond States, which I had no idea. And then went to Beyond Pricing, and now it's Beyond. And it's a direct competitor of yours now. Can you talk to me about your relationship with, say, Ian McHenry? When I came into the space and I started getting, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, Ian, I became friends with Ian, and we, had some great times, and I learned a lot about the space from him. How was that like? And when I came in, he was at that time, the CEO. And was he also the co-founder? I'm just confused with, and so how does this timeline work? And I'm just curious how that all played out.
The original founder of Beyond Stays, ultimately what pivoted to Beyond Pricing, was actually Eric Wu.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Eric founded Movity. He left Beyond Stays to go found Open Door.
Okay.
Which is crazy.
In your place.
What a horrible decision.
To
go and do that.
Oops. Now, I mean, there are parts of the story I'll share, and some things I probably won't hear. So Eric actually brought me in to be, I was CEO, brought in to be CEO of Beyond Stays. And as you can probably guess, that's not necessarily a popular decision for other people who had been there at the time. It's kind of like, hey, who's this young whippersnapper who's like going to come in and like doesn't necessarily know the category super well, but is maybe arguably in Eric Wu's mind, kind of a hustler and a builder. And within that company had a little bit of cash from Eric. We probably had about $300,000 raised kind of on debt vehicles at the time. So our investors had no true ownership of the organization. And about 3 months in, we were managing. So Beyond Stays was a property management company similar to Pillow, if you remember Pillow. But really what both those teams were looking at was kind of this notion of, could you take a bunch of Airbnb properties in urban environments and slap a service layer and a brand layer on top of it and start to create value? And even though that was happening in the vacation rental space, that really wasn't yet happening in the urban environment.
Yeah, there's still a disconnect between like a vacation destination and an urban destination.
Yeah, so a lot of differences in the businesses, and we weren't managing yet multifamily buildings. That wasn't even a thing in the category yet, but managing distributed properties. And we were updating prices twice a week by hand. And it was like, okay, cool. Revenue management is definitely a thing, but can we automate this? And to my knowledge, the first automated pricing engine was written by a friend of mine when we were sitting next to each other at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning in San Francisco. And my friend Zane ended up figuring out how to basically hit the Airbnb mobile API, it's a nice way to put it, and update prices based on an algorithm. So at that point, it's like, okay, so it works. So now all we got to do is figure out how to layer in some sort of kind of first, like a very structured, but still structured, but dynamic. And by that, I mean, like, not necessarily like you look at kind of temporal pacing, you look at weekend pricing, you don't necessarily look at, you might price in some holidays, but you're still kind of structuring a dynamic pricing model, right? So those were the early versions of the product. And you can go back and verify all this. You can actually, we then, after using it for a couple of weeks, said, well, this is pretty cool. Let's throw it up on a website and put it on Product Hunt. And let's see what happens. So
now,
Product Hunt.
Explain to the audience what Product Time is.
Product Hunt is a website where people post new projects, and you'd be like, okay, well, like how many new projects are there per day? And the answer is now there are hundreds. Mm-hmm. But at the time, there were probably 10 to 20 software projects launching per day. And Product Hunt was it was kind of like one of the sites you'd post it on if you were hoping to get some sort of like incremental traction. Okay. And if you won product of the day, it was kind of like a nice thing. And everyone would spam their friends and be like, vote for me, vote for me. Kind of like we all did with Shorties recently, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we posted on it, and it kind of caught a little bit of fire. And within probably a week or 10 days, we probably had 7 to 10% of San Francisco signed up. And so we're like, okay, well, what would it take to launch us in other markets? And so we just kind of like really tipped into this thing that all of a sudden became so interesting. It's like, well, we're not going to do the operations company anymore. And by the way, if we were going to build an operations company to be a multi-city or multinational company, you need to build software first. Among the softwares you would build is revenue management. Right. But because it caught fire, and I'm much more of a product person than I am an operations person, ended up going back to those investors and saying, hey, here's like a signal. Let's pursue it. We started to put a fundraise together. It was during that fundraise, I found out a few things that ultimately led to a breakup of you asked me about Ian, of that kind of working relationship. We'll put it that way.
Okay.
And ultimately it led, that I took the data science team from there, partnered up with 3 other guys from Y Combinator, and started both Wheelhouse and eventually what became Lyric.
Okay.
At the same time.
So that at that time, when there was fire was caught and there's people looking at things, then there wasn't necessarily, and these are my words, wasn't necessarily a meeting of minds. You maybe weren't aligning on the executive level. And so at that time you said, okay, we're going to go do our thing. You could do your thing. And you went in 2 separate directions at that time.
It is much more complicated than that.
Well, I'm definitely dumbing this down.
Yeah. Yes, you're correct. For the sake of folks, like that is correct. I think we had a difference of opinion on a whole bunch of different things. The depth of data science required for accurately pricing homes, the way you should run a business, and then other kind of just like things that were discovered during the course of diligence, investors' diligence in our organization, that were not what you would want if you're going to commit to building with someone for the next decade, which is really what's required of a big startup outcome.
Right. Looking at this, let's look at the trajectories there at that time, though, beyond pricing, or at that time, fucking took off.
Yeah.
And when you talk dynamic pricing, and dynamic pricing was that buzzword for like 2 years straight. Like no one could get it through a conversation without saying dynamic pricing in the short-term rental space. And it was all beyond pricing, beyond pricing, beyond pricing, beyond pricing. No one knew what Wheelhouse was at the time. Yes, people knew what Lyric was, but it was a little bit different. So let's talk. We don't necessarily want to talk the beyond pricing trajectory here. We want to talk your trajectory. So what happens, next? Let's talk about Lyric and then go from there into the Wheelhouse story.
Yeah. So Lyric was built on top of Wheelhouse. We built Wheelhouse for about 12 months before we started to say, what happens if you not only price properties, but what happens if you use kind of data science and looking at properties, basically the analysis of properties to start to lease and eventually design and manage properties, right? And the ultimate goal of Lyric, which is happening now, right, was basically others are doing this, not Lyric. Could we leverage, a full stack approach from data science all the way eventually to the development of assets and build a full stack hospitality company? And the competitive advantages against this, and like the 2 value creations long term, well, maybe arguably 3, in our opinions, in short-term rentals, we're going to come from a brand, which connoted kind of data or kind of design and service, et cetera. So Lyric over-invested in brand for sure. That was a big over-investment for us. Ended up hiring the former head of brand for Starwood to come in and build the brand with us. And then we wanted to invest in data and software that would allow us to cut operations costs. Because if you could have a brand that attracted a ton of folks, and you could leverage software and data to be able to cut your operational costs, you theoretically had a model that was much more scalable than a hotel model and kind of more profitable. So Lyric was like a multi-year vision around that. I still think, I think in my conclusion, even pre-COVID, was that our space was still probably 3 to 5 years from reaching its full fruition. That means spaces are selected and built from the ground up.
Right. Purpose-built stuff.
Purpose-built. And it's like, yes, it's expensive for folks in our space, but for others, it's going to be a really good investment. And like every design decision you would make would be different if your average guest stayed for 5 nights as opposed to a year. Like you would just, you would think about everything from kitchen design to laundry facilities, et cetera, differently. We could talk about that, but like basically we thought the data science and software plus a great brand would allow you to eventually go compete against some of the best operating companies in the world, that being Marriott and others who are actually really good at their jobs. Are they like creating the sexiest brands in our minds? Maybe not, but are they really good at the details? Absolutely. Hospitality is hard.
Yeah.
So the way to attack smart, established, well-financed businesses was to create a model that looked very, very different. And especially on the data and software side, we didn't think the hotel cos, despite their capital stack, were well set up to build great software. Yeah. I still believe that. That's why I was still bet on some of the up and comers in our category standing a very good chance of creating the definitive brands of the next generation.
Interesting. Do you who are some of these up and comers in your mind?
Well, Sonder gets the most press, certainly, but there's another generation that was coming up kind of right behind. So Sonder, Lyric, Stay Alfred, and others were all pretty darn exposed pre-COVID. And also we all had taken this space from being like, there were no full floors or full buildings that were doing short-term rentals. It was kind of like hard to convince a multifamily owner to work with someone like us pre-COVID.
Right.
And we kind of all spent time going into the boardrooms and convincing people like, hey, there's actually something really, really cool here. Let's build this together. And when COVID wiped out the playing field, there are a bunch of super well-positioned people, some who had just grown in smarter ways, to be blunt, who are ready to spring up. Those teams include Mint House, Sexton Stays, Front Desk.
Didn't Sexton get a lot of the Stay Alfred inventory?
Yeah, teams who are well-positioned.
Yeah.
It's like teams who are well-positioned and not overexposed. We're in a great position to buy on pennies on the dollar from furniture to leases.
Right. Well, tell us about how is yours, and maybe not yours, but your team, and please just, is your connection? Is there some sort of connection to Stay Alfred as well? Am I correct with that, or am I wrong?
John DeRelay, who leads our sales and revenue management team, is, in my opinion, one of the best people at revenue management in the category. Was
super smart dude. I've had some amazing conversations with John. And he's side note, he's an amazing artist as well.
Amazing.
But I'm a big fan of John, by the way. You have a stud on your team.
So John was the head of revenue management at Stay Alfred, and John's entrepreneurial journey is also awesome. He's really come up and worked across a bunch of domains. But we ended up partnering with John about 1.5 years ago. And I do know Jordan Allen, the CEO, and invested in his new thing because I think he's
Dorsey. I want to have him on too. Like
he's great. Yeah, super just great hustler. So ultimately, I think there's a narrative of we're all competitors in the category. Like there's also, you become friends with a lot of your competitors is the truth.
Right.
That's the industry. It's
right.
Yeah.
So Jordan's a friend at this point. But yeah, Lyric, Stay Alfred, some Domio, others wipe out, right?
Right.
Worst possible scenario to be a venture-backed, urban, corporate travel-focused hospitality company during a global pandemic. That's just like,
right.
You don't want to be there. You don't want to be there.
that went into the arbitrage model not knowing that COVID was gonna fuck you.
Yeah, and like honestly, like WeWork was the first punch when WeWork really blew up, and all of a sudden the capital conditions changed. So it went from everyone being like, we will give you hundreds of millions of dollars to scale this as quickly as you possibly can, to, there are bigger risks than we realized. That was punch one. Punch two was COVID.
Yep. Man, so let's talk. Like, there's so much to digest here, and not enough time. We could have 3 or 4 episodes to kind of talk about your story, and I love this.
I learned a lot at you all too. Yeah.
No, it's good. No, it's good. I think our audience is going to dig this. I want to get into, current state of spinning out of Lyric, and let's talk about this race and, and everything that happened and where you're going. But I had a question for you. Lack of better terms, were you like, where's there animosity? Did you have, like, looking at the success in the trajectory that Beyond was having early on in this space when you did split? Did it just drive you more to keep on? You knew you're going in the direction that you wanted to go, or were you pissed off? Were you like, what the fuck? Like what was it like?
Depended on the day.
Yeah.
I ultimately, like, I actually, I think Dave and Ian, to their credit, did some decent things to take care of me when Beyond eventually did their thing with Bessemer. And I thought that was well handled. I thought there were some frustrating things that took place. I think ultimately, like I shared at the beginning, like, I'm all about the journey. Like, I do think there's a right way to embark on the journey. And I was frustrated about some of the ways they had taken place. I was also pretty in love with building Wheelhouse plus Lyric. I was pretty confident that the pricing space in particular had years of evolution to go. And even that Lyric, which ultimately moved towards this portfolio model, was going to push into a domain that, unless you were operating in it, you probably wouldn't figure out how to price the supply, because it was kind of combining short-term rental pricing with portfolio theory. So I ultimately thought Wheelhouse long-term had the competitive advantage for certain reasons. We weren't investing in it like Beyond was. So that was like frustrating for me, because I did spend 90+% of my time building Lyric. And if we brought up Wheelhouse in the boardroom, it's like, well, Wheelhouse, we might have to not even push it out the door as a consumer brand at some point. It might be too core competency. And I was like, no. Like, the model is turn your cost centers into profit centers. Turn software from a cost center into a profit center. Eventually turn your operations from a cost center into a profit center. Turn your FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, from a cost center into a profit center by starting to have a real brand line that people might purchase. Those are the crazy notions that was the crazy way you would upset the hospitality space, was to truly turn former cost centers into profit centers. So I thought the growth of Wheelhouse was underinvested by the organization, but, like, you start to build these businesses at scale in tandem with your team and in tandem with your investors. Right.
Yeah.
And we had Wheelhouse was kind of chugging along, actually had a decent growth rate, but Lyric was where eventually we raised north of $100 million of capital.
Right.
And when your investors are in the boardroom being like, well, let's scale this. We gave you money to scale Lyric. It's like, okay,
yes, but
it's like, hey, there's an awesome margin, like a incredible margin business sitting right here, and it's underinvested in. And that was frustrating. That's frustrating. And, like, honestly, there've been a lot of, Mateo, you asked me, like, what is it like? And I shared ups and downs. Like, it was tough.
Yeah.
Leaving Beyond. That was not a fun series of dating. And ultimately felt great that a few folks from Y Combinator kind of said, hey, we've heard the story. We want to build with you. Yeah. And that, like, was like awesome. the biggest boomerang ever.
Right. Yeah, I can only imagine the weight off your shoulders, just like, thank God. Like, I can just,
Well, it's kind of your word against others in situations like that. And at that time, I was like, I feel like I'm lucky to now have done so many fundraisers that I have a better investor network. But at the time was, I had the trust of Eric Wu, who ultimately has come back and invested in our new orgs. And I had the trust of others, but it was iffy for a little while there. So that was scary. But anyway, I think.
So in that situation, what we dig into here is, we get to the core of the story, like taxing, right? Draining, stressful, right? But what did they see? Like, what did they see that proved that spark, was, that there was something still to invest in? Because when you get down in those times, and you get that tunnel vision, but others don't necessarily see the same world that you do, right? Mm-hmm. They're not burdened with the stress that you are. They're not understanding the complex relationships and all of the things that go into that. And so, talk a bit about like what pulled you through that. And because you got to have, number one, you got to have faith in yourself. You have faith in your abilities, faith in your ideas, but for others to also, it's got to be magnetic to the point that others can see it and believe in that. So there's something there. They didn't just trip over it and say, oh, Andrew still got it, we're going to go check in with him. There's something there that you imprinted somewhere with somebody and some people that were like, this guy's got it. We're going to put our horses on his cart and roll with him. What do you think that was?
For one, I don't know.
Fair enough.
Like I would love to tell you, Mateo, that this is all a grand plan. And the reason I like share this kind of, I'll say maybe more candidly or hopefully humbly, is like, I want other people to know who maybe who weren't the Mark Zuckerbergs who dropped out, who could drop out of school and start their business. Like entrepreneurship is a career path and you're going to fail and you're going to struggle. And ultimately, I think, and someone told me this very, very early on, ultimately entrepreneurship will set you free. And I think, so I think that idea has driven me a lot. I think in terms of what people saw, I think ironically, and this is part of the reason I love Silicon Valley, for as much as you can make fun of it, and I have to make fun of it sometimes too. I mean, there is an attitude in this town, which is your struggles and your losses, should you look at them through the right perspective, have taught you more about how to ultimately build success. And this town is forgiving, and entrepreneurship in general and venture capital is ultimately, in my mind, forgiving, because they're like, hey, like I know if I was to look at a young person building business, I'd be like, great, I really believe in you, and you're probably going to fail anyway, but you're going to start to get all the seeds of success that you need. And I think what people ultimately therefore probably saw was, I'm pretty hungry, I work pretty hard, I am eager to learn and be told that I'm wrong. And like, I think those things are enough where it's like, and I try to treat teammates well, right? So I do think people want to build. I'm fortunate that I think people like building with me, and I like building with them, right? So I think there's like enough of those components where like when you're betting on early stage companies, you are betting on the individuals who run it. So I don't take lightly that people have bet on me and re-bet on us with Wheelhouse, right? After spinning out a lyric. Like, I don't take that lightly at all. I take it as the greatest gift I've ever been given. And I'm going to ultimately honor all those bets, right? That's the goal, part one. And part two is, now I hope to get to the point where I get to bet on others who are going through that same thing. Cause it is, if everyone only got one shot at this, that wouldn't be the most exciting place. But multiple shots at entrepreneurship are essential for seeing all the ideas that we see out in the world today.
So how does that narrative not get told? Because the success is really in the failures, right? Like people think we have this society that thinks everything just happens overnight. We don't shine lights on the true struggles of like what, we just see the mountaintop. We don't see the journey to the top, right? Or we just see that you rode your bike from here to there. We don't know what that journey was, that the bike broke down and what you learned in that space. And like that, I feel like is probably, and I think you mentioned a little bit, like that's where the value comes in. Like how many times have, people in Silicon Valley or anywhere, anyone who's been successful at anything failed along the way. And we as a culture, and I think just broadly, not even within our industry, don't focus on the value of that failure, because we still create this attitude where failure's bad. And if you fail, it's done and you can't succeed. But people that break through those barriers, right? Like people that don't give up and people that continue to try and continue to work and impart the things that they've learned through those failures, those are the ones that are set free, right? Through the entrepreneurship. The ones that don't, because when you said that, it put an asterisk in my mind, because yes, it does set you free if you don't give up. And that's the key to being entrepreneurship, right? Is not giving up. It's to continue to drive, to continue to bet on yourself, to continue to bet on your idea, to continue to bet on your teams and pushing that through.
It's the lessons learned. It's like when those failures, if one can go ahead and look at their lessons learned from these failures, those are the ones that are going to succeed. It's the ones that just look at it, fuck, I failed again. Or, and don't actually learn and change go at a different approach, pivot, do whatever you need to do to go ahead and try it again. It's those that actually can look at it as a life lesson and and as a building block to getting to where you need to go. I mean, we, look at us, Teo, like, look at how many in this and our other things, look at how many times we've failed. And it's just looking at things with I think entrepreneurs in general are those that can accept failure as a building block and move forward, but not accept it as like an outcome.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well said. Well said. And it's a little bit of, there's a couple, can I add a few thoughts here too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a little bit of framing too. So like, hey, if people are like, hey, your company failed, but you're like, yeah, but I met 100 amazing people and I now know 5 people I want to build my next idea with, and I've got investors who I trust. Like, was that a failure?
Right.
Or is that like success? Or, that's so part of it is framing and like, as an entrepreneur, I was so insecure about 30 words, that idea. I started the publishing company. I didn't go home for a couple of years because I was like, I don't want people to ask me about it because I know how exposed this is. Right. Like, right. And I actually found it to be so fun to like learn how to build a business and all the things that go into it and determine your days, et cetera. But there was a lot of failure there. But like, I think you got to be comfortable with the reframe, part one. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I do think we're moving towards a society where failure is more understood. Like venture capital is kind of predicated on the notion of let's take a bunch of risks, and a bunch of the businesses we invest in are going to fail, but the ones who win are going to win really big.
Yeah.
Right. And when I moved to San Francisco, right, there was Y Combinator was starting. Now there are hundreds of accelerators everywhere in the world, and most countries are on earth. Yeah. And you have venture capitalists who focus on every single niche you could think up, and hundreds, thousands of venture capital firms. And now you have kind of angels who syndicate funds. And like, I think people are leaning into the notion that these risky things or failure is more likely, more risk, more failure, right? Is actually a great way. It might take longer to prove out these bets. It does. Right.
But ultimately it's a bet, right? It's a calculated bet, based on drive, ambition, and idea, right? It's I have a question in the future when we get through going back to that, and you mentioned Angel, but before we run, and we still have a little bit of time, but tell us about where your current state and break. I want to hear like, how did you get were you able to spin out of Lyric? I mean, we know that, this happened, you mentioned earlier back in January, and you just went live with it. But tell us about that journey. Was it accepted internally? Was it like, we're eventually we're going to allow this to happen? Or was it a struggle? Was there a fight? I'd love to hear this story.
Yeah. So we, the relevant background, and I'll speed up to the restructure because that's where it gets interesting. But the relevant background is March 1st, 2020, a deal fell apart with a major OTA that would have probably allowed Lyric to survive COVID.
Allow Lyric to what? I'm sorry,
survive COVID. And I called my dad at the end of February and said, hey, we're going to survive COVID. It's going to be really rough, but we're going to buy up the whole industry on the other side. That's how confident I was in what was going to happen. And on March 1st, when that deal fell apart, I had to call my dad back and say, oh, I was wrong yesterday. So when that deal fell apart, Lyric, we had actually run down scenarios in January or February of that year. A board member had said, run a scenario where revenue drops 90%, because China revenue was dropping 99% for some travel companies. And we were like, that's crazy. And the board member said, run it now. What would you do to survive? And so by March 1st, when the deal fell apart, we had a plan to survive, and we had 3 plans, and none of them looked great.
Right.
And we ended up doing the
getting
most
by.
aggressive.
How do you get by?
Yeah. And the way to definitively get by without question, not knowing when hospitality would return, right? Because, post Katrina, New Orleans has never returned to the same travel levels. And after 9/11, New York took 5 years to recover. So we're like, okay, well, a global pandemic, should we bet on a year or a 3-year or a 10-year recovery? And what is hospitality going to look like at the end of that? So like, can we, or would it be wise in any form to continue to exist as an operating company? And our answer ultimately was no. Cut to technology.
Yeah.
Cut to technology that is flexible, is nimble, can be built for the next generation. So 18 days later, so March 18th, and this is not a glorious day, this is a terrible day, over Zoom, because we couldn't go to the office, we had to say goodbye to 135 teammates.
Eesh.
And to 15 of those 135, we had to say, hey, we need to actually retain you for 2, 4, or 6 months to tear down Lyric. And if we're sued by any building we're in right now, our company's dead. And to the other 15 out of that 150, we said, we're a technology company again, and we're building. And we didn't even necessarily.
From what, let's reiterate these numbers again. From what number to 15?
150 full-time.
To 15 full-time.
Yeah, probably fewer than 15, to be honest. Yeah.
Damn.
So that was really tough and extremely sad. And it took, but like, you can't live in that world, unfortunately. Like, there's not a lot of time for grieving when you're trying to save a company.
Yeah.
And we knew if we didn't get serious about building back as quickly as possible, no way the team was going to stick together, no way investors were going to stand by us, et cetera. So we needed to get to building. And we ultimately, well, we focused on 2 technology products at first. We really honed in on Wheelhouse as being the one where it's like deep area expertise, novel technology built for Lyric that hasn't yet hit the market. A belief that even hotel technology was not super advanced. So you could apply kind of what we had learned pricing Lyric to bring kind of a new pricing platform to market. And the rallying cry really quickly for our organization by necessity, but also by through kind of just like passion was, well, we want to be the team that took the ultimate punch and survived it and built out. And we want our investors, every investor who's around the table, because at that point, Lyric had a lot of investors and a bunch of cash. We wanted every single one of those investors, when they had entrepreneurs who reached really tough times, be able to say to folks, you can do it, because Wheelhouse did after losing everything.
Yeah. So like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
Yeah. So like, obviously, like in 98% of scenarios, we fail anyway, and we never have a chance. And we in our minds, we haven't achieved what we set out to achieve yet. We've raised capital. That's different than a great outcome. But it was a critical stepping stone, the restructure. And the restructure took 7 months, because when you're trying to restructure $100 million of kind of investment, your cap table, and Lyric had debt that's publicly known. We had to restructure all of it and put our team in a position where we had the upside that was requisite of the talent we're lucky to have around the table. And if all those pieces didn't come together, there was no go forward. But the go forward also had to be predicated on a real business being there. So Wheelhouse, we kind of executed for 12 months, launched something called Wheelhouse Pro. During our fundraise, got lucky to win Innovation of the Year. That actually was a big catalyst for us.
Congrats on that.
Yeah, man. Congrats. That's huge, man.
Thank you. Yeah. Like I got to tell the team, like, everything you've worked for, because our teammates had no equity, right? We were sitting under $100 million of preference.
Right.
So all of it was predicated on the belief that we had just like a core crew of folks who, should we rally together and build together, we're going to be pretty unstoppable. And like, so now when we ultimately were fundraising, which was hard, I mean, the list of no's was high, and we had to keep bringing new, like, hey, we've improved this aspect of the preference or the debt, and keep bringing new structures to investors, and ultimately ended up raising and having an oversubscribed round, right? We had too much capital around the table, which is kind of crazy. And I really credit to 2 teammates, Matt and John, who A, stuck with the company, and B, knew exactly how to pull off a restructure, because I did not. And they did, and I learned so much working from them. It's like, it was a great team effort, from the product team to the customers, that the CS team that took care of customers when their businesses were wrecked, to the kind of business team that ultimately was able to pull off the restructure. It was a total team effort and went through fire, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Again, we're talking about these lessons learned, these building blocks. Of course, you're not going to trade this for anything. This is the fabric of who you are. This is the fabric of Wheelhouse, and it's the fabric of, Lyric. It's, to some extent as well.
In a lot of ways, our category, right? We reflect the strength of the category a lot.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. What an amazing story.
It is.
And
so Go, John, go ahead. I got a question.
No, go. You're all about it. You're
ready. Because I think it's exciting, and I think it's technology's changing everything. Companies that have gone through this, we've filtered out, and not to be, again, but it's the reality, right? People aren't here anymore. The industry's changing. Technology is still pushing forward. It's still a critically important part of our business. It's evolving and growing. Where's the future lie for your specific space as PMSs grow, as property managers still want that one all-inclusive solution, right? And it's the mythical animal that are is wished for broadly everywhere. And so where do you see the push next for your space? Like, where are you running towards? Where are you pushing towards? Where are you bullish about?
Yeah, we're going deep. We're going deep in our category, right? I actually think ultimately, even though people say they want a one-stop solution, I actually don't think that's the right way, because to be an expert, so I usually think about property management software, channel management software, revenue management software, IoT, so devices, potentially guest comms, potentially operational software. All those are super difficult problems. And I could keep going on the list of things where expertise is going to be required. But like, it is so hard to build a data-driven pricing engine that understands each home and looks at every single booking in the market or at a property and knows how to translate that into an effective and accurate price for your home, and to build the software layer that allows you to interact and change the strategy, because it's so essential. And then that problem alone is so hard that, like, would you really want a team spending 10% of their time on that to deliver a revenue management solution for you? No way. So like, we are going really deep, because I don't think our technology, just like I said, our space is still 3 to 5 years away from having like inventory design for it. I think the software systems are 3 to 5 years away. I know, like, I've had a chart of the next 8 years, or 8 generations of evolutions of the pricing engines. And we are in Gen 3
of 8
minimum.
That's amazing.
Right? There's so, and I've had this chart for 5 years, and like the loss of Lyric was tough, but like, man, now we get to execute on this vision we've had, because we didn't think the category was moving fast. We did not think the leaders of the space were pushing the category in the way that it needed to be pushed. And we didn't think they were building transparently, which we think is really, really important. You've got to publish your research. It's got to be unacceptable over the next year to not publish what research you're doing when you take over pricing for someone's business. Right? Like, that's, I
agree. And I agree with coming from the, property management software sales and understanding that landscape pretty decently. I think that, like the direction that property management software goes. And I was actually just talking to someone about this yesterday. I think that, you want, there are two camps of thoughts for property managers. They want that all-in-one solution, but at the same time, they want an open API so that they can go ahead and plug in their solution, because as businesses scale, you want to be able to scale the business with the tools that will allow you to go ahead and scale it. Now, a property management software, a good property management software is not going to say that they are the best at everything. They're going to be good at a certain thing, whether it be accounting. And I think every property management software needs to focus on accounting, like needs to have that like as their core competency, and in booking, and having a decent booking engine that plugs into it. And I think that and then offer some great solutions, but, realize that there are gold standards that are out there, Wheelhouse, Breezeway, these different companies that are gold standard for their respective focus, and they know that they're spending 100% of their time like focusing on their craft and putting 100% of their effort into making that one aspect of it better. How can a property management software say that we have the best of everything? They can't. So a good one can put out a decent product that everyone can get decently scale with. But then when you want to go ahead and really take it to the next level, bring in a pro, bring in a Wheelhouse or whatever. There's other companies out there that are top tier. You have decent competition. One's going to be joining our podcast in a couple of weeks, and allow the experts, and build that trust with them. But the open API and clean code, I think is where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Give them the option.
Yeah. And we work in a space where everyone truly believes our business is unique. So therefore, don't we need to have some different software solutions out there for these very unique businesses that change so much and are very multidimensional? The answer is yes. So you're right, John. I think the interoperability and the ability for people to easily move between systems, PMS, channel manager, revenue management, when the time is right for their business.
Right.
I'd like to see that become much easier. And it will. It will. But I think depth of software in all the key categories is going to be required. You're going to have really fast moving expert teams trying to solve everything from digital access to distribution to you name it for the next decade, probably.
Right.
And I have no ambition of building a PMS at all. I have no ambition of building channel management.
Right.
Really?
With a mobile first approach. And that's where these amazing, there's, I could think of two off the top of my head, and I'm not throwing, that are really great softwares that do a lot of things really, really well. And they are ultimately relatively open API. With that said, their mobile suck. The mobile, it sucks. Yeah. And if you're going to go ahead and you want to, in today's day and age, with AI being what it is today, and with automation being exactly what it is today, and machine learning and everything out there, a company that there used to be, when you have 100 units or 150, 200 units, you used to have way more employees to go ahead and to make that to run. Obviously the operational side is still going to be the operational side. You still need cleaning, housekeeping, maintenance, that whole thing. But the executive level, the management level, you need less people to go ahead and do that today because of automations. With that said, you need to give those people that are wearing multiple hats running around access on their phone to do 99.9% of the stuff, and not have to rely on a laptop or an iPad. Like you don't need a tablet to run. It needs to be able to be done on your phone, because you want to go in, boom, 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 get it done, and you're on to the next thing. These people are busy. Yeah. And that's where these premier softwares right now that are great software, they suck at it. You hear me. You want
to know the truth?
Yeah, tell me.
I don't think Wheelhouses get on mobile.
No, but it should be.
Mobile's hard.
But I'll share why. Everything we built today,
right?
Literally 95% of our product roadmap is aimed at large portfolios. That's 100 plus listings, right?
Before you get into it, real quick, let me restructure my setting. Take out pricing and accounting.
Okay.
Everything else needs to be mobile accessible. I totally get it. When you need to go ahead and you're looking at spreadsheets or just large things, I get it. That can't be done well on mobile. We'll take out accounting, we'll take out pricing, but everything else needs to be bomber on a phone.
Well, and it's not interoperable between desktop and mobile. And that is
agree.
But it is interesting because sometimes we get called out for our mobile experience. I'm like, look, you can use it, but really when you're making pricing decisions other than automations, sit down, take a look at the data.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway.
I'm not trying to do my pricing. I'm not trying to do my pricing from my phone. Yeah. But agree, the UX experiment needs to, it should be that the customer wants seamless, right? At the end of the day, they want the same functionality on a desktop, phone, car, wherever they're, the more.
Who the hell works in their car, Mateo?
And more people now probably than ever. You know how many people live in vans now?
Yeah.
Hey, it's
growing.
Andrew, this has been awesome. This has been a great conversation. I wish we could keep going. We do have to button this up. Congrats on the raise. Congrats on the spin-off. Congrats on your whole trajectory has been super fun. This has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Great questions. Super fun. Appreciate it all.
Absolutely. Definitely. Do you have anything like anything you want to leave with the audience today?
I don't think so. I mean,
no secrets, nothing you want to drop bombs on us.
If you had fun hearing the story and you're battling with your own startup struggle and you want to talk about it, give me a shout.
Hey, wait. Oh, you did say maybe we heard it here first earlier. What was that you taught? You mentioned something earlier.
I was going to share a little bit more about all the investors who came into the round, but because like it's a bunch of people from the short-term and vacation rental space. It's a bunch of hotel groups. I don't think we have time to share the whole list, but it's like, it's kind of, remember what we were talking today a little bit about. Necessarily, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
It's
building relationships,
and who knows, right? You.
Yep. So it's like, therefore, part of building a business is really building a network around your company that ensures it succeeds. And I am really excited about the network of folks who have come around the table. There's a long list of folks. We'll have to, maybe I'll send you some notes for the show notes, something like that. But we are proud of the group of investors that we brought around the table and who from the short-term rental space bet on us.
Well, let's do this. If you're able to share that with us, send me an email and we'll go ahead and we'll put it in the show notes.
Excellent.
Yeah. No, I love, man, that you make the point to, a lot of people, I'm not gonna say a lot of people, but it's great to see that team approach is done. Oftentimes the narrative gets sewn in a way that it's the person at the top did it, but and not really, wrapping their arms around everyone that's holding them up. And, shout out to you for doing that. And John, it sounds like we need to do a no bullshit short-term rental entrepreneurship, something rather. Get a couple of these guys on here and really, dig into let's get into the meat of this thing and let people tell their stories. Let them tell about that journey. So
all about it.
We got some work to do. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Andrew, thanks so much, man.
Hey, thanks.
Great time. Appreciate it, guys. Be well.
Yep.